Welcome everyone to another episode of Broken by Concept, episode 228. We've got a special episode today. Joined with us, XPetu, the Shen enthusiast, multi-role challenger, mathematical prodigy. Thanks for coming on again for round two, XPetu.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really loved coming on here last time, and I felt it was time to do it again, so now I'm here.
It was long overdue.
Last time we sort of were talking about your Shen journey, one trick in League. This episode, framing it for our audience, we're going to get into the details here about itemization, stats, analytics in League. Now, our audience knows, and Curtis and I admit this ourselves, we don't know much about this. We don't really get too much into this. We don't really talk about it. We're more about mindset, process, all that. So I guess sort of XPetu, you're sort of going to be teaching us, educating us of your findings over the last year or so.
Yeah, I mean, I would even say it's more so over the last 6-7 years. So that's the process that we've been working through.
I think a really good place to start would be, your journey. Now, we're going to get into, your Coachless platform and, I guess your thesis as well that you recently posted. I think it was on your YouTube as well, right?
Yeah.
So I guess where did this all start? I guess take us to ground zero. What led you to this point? What led you down this rabbit hole of, getting into the statistical side of League of Legends, itemization, that whole thing. So I guess walk us through that.
Okay, I have ground zero here. I think this is good. So ground zero is way back when I was 15 years old. And I had played League for like 3 years. And my friend told me that there's this challenger player who plays Nidalee only. And they would build like any item in the game. Okay? And that was really fascinating to me. He showed me like I don't know if it was OPGG at the time, probably OPGG. He showed me this Nidalee player who was building like, one game he was building Ginsus, then he was building like Blade of the Ruined King, then there was like Trinity Force, then there was full AP. And I was like, damn, like how can someone be so good that they can build any item in the game and make it work? That was like my first kind of tick with itemization. Then, fast forward a couple of years, I start being like pretty good at the game. I start playing Shen only, and I'm like, okay, the itemization part of League, this is like very interesting for me because you can like really express your identity and also like just try to optimize things in a very numerical / like concept forward way. And then I started really getting into this idea of, okay, I'm just gonna like make this my niche. So I'm gonna build like off meta items. I'm gonna find like weird builds that somehow work. And I think that's like a lot of the things that helped me through my early YouTube career is that I was doing a lot of these, like, you can say they're clickbait videos because they are in a sense that I'm like, new Shen build, blah, blah, blah. But it was mostly just about this passion of finding different items. So that was like ground zero, I think, just being intrigued by the whole item system, which I think is interesting.
Okay. And so you kind of had that starting point, and then obviously you went down the educational route with your YouTube and really all in on Shen and becoming, arguably one of the best Shen players in the world. But now you've taken things to the next level, right? You've now, transformed something that was just kind of a hobby, or like not even a hobby, even just like a passion. Now to, you've kind of taken that passion and created something. So, and I guess maybe a good place to start would then be maybe talk us through your thesis, and then we can, go from there.
Yeah. So I'm very happy to talk about this. So it was maybe 2020 that I did like this kind of school project where I was using machine learning to find out which team will win from champion select. So the problem was simply to say, okay, let's say we have these 5 players and these 5 champions, and then these 5 players and these 5 champions. Which team is stronger? That was like a very, classical machine learning example because you have a large data set of these champion picks and players and then win or loss label. So all I tried to do there was try to predict which team wins. Well, turns out I was pretty bad at machine learning at the time because it was my first project. So it ended up having like 53% accuracy. So it was slightly better than a coin flip, right? So not very good model. Then like 2 years pass, I did my master's courses and I was getting this point where I need to do my thesis now. And I was thinking like, okay, what's an interesting topic? I want to do something related to League, but I need to somehow tie it into existing research and make it like a valid actual master's thesis. So then I started thinking about this problem of itemization again. And it's actually not clear how this kind of like win estimation ties into itemization instantly. So the kind of like standpoint that I went from was that, hey, let's think about what's the most direct measure of value in League of Legends. Because you can think about like choices, like gameplay choices and rewards as gold. Like a lot of people try to tie in gold as the like ultimate metric, because people look at gold advantage when they're assessing like a lead in League of Legends. They look at like, okay, how much gold am I gonna lose when I recall here? How much gold I'm gonna gain by going to top lane right now? That sort of thing. But gold is not like the definitive metric that shows which team won a certain scenario, right? So I thought, okay, what is the ultimate metric there? Well, if we look at purely from a like game theoretical perspective, the optimal strategy in a zero-sum game, so a game where there's winner and loser, is to maximize your probability of winning. Therefore, your win probability is like the ultimate metric of gameplay choices. Because everything that you do, you're essentially trying to maximize your probability of winning, right? Are you following me here?
Yeah, I follow. I follow so far.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long talk, but anyways, like the probability of winning is then our measure of like, okay, what is good? Because if we do something that's good, we expect it to increase our probability of winning. And if we do something that's bad, we expect a decrease in win probability.
But
and the
my
probability,
one question,
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt it, but win probability, it's like a bit of a vague thing, right? Because win probability is made up of basically everything.
Yes.
Right? Gold, experience, towers taken, objectives, what champions are in the game, everything, right?
Yeah. Now this is an excellent question, because the thing is that there is no such thing as win probability, right? Like you have no concrete access to this number. Like everyone kind of implicitly is doing that calculation in their head. When someone is saying like, oh, is this winnable, right? You're making an assumption of like,
it's pure
roughly,
subjective.
Yeah, it's purely subjective. Like based on, your game knowledge, your understanding of the game, you're gonna say, okay, we're 20 kills behind. They have 4 drakes. We're probably not winning this game. But you're kind of making that estimate, right?
And even as well, there could be 2 players on the same team in the same game. One person's playing the scaling champion, who in their mind, that game's a free win. And the other person who's had a bad game, in their mind, the game is like they just want to just check out and that they don't want to win the game, or the game's like unwinnable, right?
Yeah.
They could be the exact same situation, the same amount of gold, the same amount of experience, everything at that moment. They have 2 different thoughts about whether the game's winnable or not. Everyone's experienced that. Everyone's been that person where like, okay, we're behind. I'm like maybe 1-0, but I have like 10 CS per minute. I can carry this game. I've got a scaling champion.
Yeah, 100%. It's like a confidence thing. It's a very subjective thing. And if you look at, let's think about like other sports as well. Like win probability is present in a lot of sports, and you can see it like most concretely through like the betting industry, which I personally like. I'm not that big of a fan of, because I don't, I don't like betting at all. But there have been like a lot of like work done in sports analytics, specifically for esports betting or sports betting, because what you're doing there is essentially, if you know the probability of winning at any time, then you can gain money, right? Because if you have the best estimate of the win probability, then you can say, okay, right now the expected value of making a bet for T1 in this game will be high, versus someone else who has like a worse estimate of the game state, right?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, actually,
Go ahead.
because I remember Nathan and I a while ago got reached out by this group of people, and they were trying to essentially beat the betting companies. So their whole philosophy was, okay, well, we know more about League of Legends. We can create a better model of probability of winning. And they had like this like massive like system that was all kind of in Excel, and there's like all these stats and all this like it's like it was just like a formula essentially. And then they would be able to highlight games that were like the expected value was like quite good, it'd be good to put money on that game. And then they were profitable, and they actually, that was something that they did.
I remember draft. It was more draft that they were focused on initially. They got our thoughts wrong. Was that right?
Well, no, the big one was actually first objective. and first blood. It was things like that because you could bet in League. You could bet on like first objective, like first blood, first tower, like all that stuff. And that's like,
but
where
based on their comp, it's like this looks like a comp that's like got a clear bot side win condition. Like they got, like, say, Draven and Nautilus versus Lulu or Philios. Then you could. Obviously, they're probably going to get the first couple.
And
of
then
drakes,
also
right?
there was live betting, right? So they would go halfway through the game and they could assess the compositions and then and be like, well, what's the likelihood, you know? So like stuff like that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just found that interesting.
No, that's and that's right there. You're on the money right there. So now we have to, you know, bring in the listener again. What does this have to do with itemization? Why do I care about, you know, T1 sports betting, blah blah blah? What we are talking about is we're just talking about a method of assessing a game state, right? We are trying to tie a win probability to a game state. So you have to have some way of, you know, having that long list of numbers, which is like, you know, your gold advantage, your inventories, you have your, you know, dragons taken, objectives, towers, blah, blah, blah. And you have to compile that somehow into one number, which estimates who is winning and by how much.
So, sort of to stop you here, XPetu. So basically what your work was trying to do is you're trying to figure out all these metrics here, figure out which ones are important to get to that end win probability. So you're trying to always get to the win probability. Is that
yes, that's step one. So there's actually a lot of research on this topic already. In Dota, in League of Legends, in StarCraft, in many esports games. And by far the best method for doing this is deep learning. So deep learning refers to, you know, it's a subfield of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and it's simply using big neural network models or similar on a large data set, right? And the advantage of these models is that we can just feed in a lot of data and not say anything like from a kind of like, how do you say it, like a pro analyst point of view. You don't have to make any judgment call. All you're doing is like you're letting the model figure out what is important for giving the best statistical estimate of the win probability. And that's step one, and then we're gonna get to step two soon.
So you have access to, in terms of like your capabilities with what's public, like is this all public with League? Like it's like the API or whatever, like
so
how do you get this?
Yeah, it's a good thing to talk about Riot API, which is like a very nice game developer API. So Riot API allows anyone to sign up for a personal key, which then you can use to you know, get matches, get summoners, you know, collect this kind of data. But the more advanced you want to become, the more you have to like apply for. Basically, they have this thing called like product application keys. And what they are is that when you display that, okay, we're, you know, working on an actual full-scale product and we need lots of access to the data, then they're going to go through the product and see, okay, yeah, this matches our terms of service. And then they're going to give you a free API key that's then possible to get, you know, millions of games per week, possibly. So that's
it's about volume of games, but so what is the data set that you get from just the basic that anyone anyone who's listening here can just get it, create something for our own versus the product, the product key here? Is it so? Yeah, it's just basically
so it's the same kind of data you get like for personal projects and product, but how it differs is volume, and the kind of data that you get is that if you get one match, you don't get like the entire replay. What you get is a timeline that is in JSON format, like technically. And you have like timestamps. So whenever someone kills someone, you have a timestamp. And it basically says that, okay, this guy killed this, and the current CS and stats are blah, blah, blah. And then every minute you get this kind of snapshot of the game. Basically, you can think of it as including everything that's on the scoreboard and like on the, you know, mini-map and everything, kind of like not minion positions, but like champion positions, champion kills, deaths, assists, everyone's gold, everyone's inventory, that kind of information you have.
So I got a really basic question. I'm just a layman here. I don't know nothing about this sort of stuff. But I watched a documentary a while ago on the deep learning. I think it was about the game of Go. You know the
I've seen that one.
AlphaGo. That was yeah. And if you think about AlphaGo, right? If you think about that game of Go, the amount of variables in the game of Go would be significantly lower than the amount of variables in a game of League.
Is that true?
Is that true?
That is true. That is true.
Right. So, and that was, you know, in terms of AlphaGo, I mean, that was a while ago, so I'm assuming the machine learning nowadays is a lot more sophisticated. But
Yeah.
they had like a whole team and like millions of dollars as investment.
I think Google backed that, didn't they? It wasn't Google backing that, was it? Is that right?
I think it was Microsoft, wasn't it?
It's DeepMind Laboratory is the AlphaGo, and it's nowadays it's Google DeepMind, so Google bought it.
Right. And so my question is, is it possible? Do we have the current technological capabilities to actually actually handle that amount of data in League, or is it just like, again, like you said, we're only using snapshots, or is there high level deep learning that is being done, maybe not by yourself but other people, where it's like literally analyzing every pixel in the game? Like, is that like a thing?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting topic. So I will quickly say on the complexity. So when we're talking about Go, this is a discrete field, right? You have like this piece can go only these X amount of squares, right? So you have like you have some kind of numeric amount of possibility. It's very high, but it's still like numerable. But then in League of Legends, you have what is called like a continuous action space, because everyone can input commands all of the time, and you have no limit to what those commands are, right? Because you have abilities, you have movement, you have everything. So basically, we don't have currently the methods to look at everything at the same time. You don't have real-time data looking at every single pixel, in League of Legends at least, but you have examples, for example, OpenAI, who's now very notorious for ChatGPT. They actually started with a project called OpenAI 5 that was a Dota 2 playing bot that basically used reinforcement learning, and what they did was they took all the pixels on the screen and then they convert that to some information, and then they give you the best input possible, and then they just repeat that process, and they defeated the world champions in Dota 2. So this was completely revolutionary at the time.
Why haven't they done that for League, out of their curiosity? Is it just...
Yeah, the reason is that League of Legends does not have as open of game access as Dota 2. So Dota 2 has this scripting network or like interface where you can basically input commands directly, and you can also pull all the information from the game. If you were to do that with League of Legends, you would need to read the memory, which is bannable by Riot, plus you have Vanguard, which is interfering with that process. So in like simple terms, it's just more accessible to do it on Dota 2.
And when was that done, the Dota 2?
If I remember correctly, it's like 2019, 2020.
Far out.
You can fact check
crazy.
Yeah.
The fact that they were beating the world champions in 2019, and like how far AI and like all that stuff has come in what is that, like 5 years? Like that is insane.
I mean, you'd love to see, like, let's say, you know, T1 obviously winning worlds just right now. Like, what happens if they've, you know, versed an AI version of that for League? Like, that would be so fascinating. Like, so, like, would you think that? Is it possible? Like, would T1 be able to beat that, or would it not be close? Like,
at the risk of going too far of a kind of like I don't know, side pitch here from our itemization topic, I will just briefly say that what happened in Dota was that it actually changed the meta. When I was talking to like a basically challenger equivalent of a Dota player, who also happens to have a PhD in artificial intelligence, and he told me that what happened was that the OpenAI 5 discovered a strategy which was not previously done in Dota, and that was buying lots of tangos or health potions basically. So what they did is that on their second back, they would buy like 5 health potions, and they would, using the courier, which is like this kind of like unit that moves items from the shop to yourself, they would constantly keep buying health potions during the laning phase, and then they would just keep laning all the time, force opponent out of lane, and then get an advantage. So they were like heavily investing into consumables, which was something that, you know, normal players don't do. And then on top of that, they were like, you can imagine what it feels like to play versus a scripter, right? They're always like on the max range of your auto attack range, always spacing you correctly, always dodging every ability. So it's not really a fair challenge. But I would say that same kind of thing would work for League of Legends, and they would probably beat the world champions. It's just, I think, a fact.
Yeah. It's interesting because I remember what I took away from the I keep forgetting the name of it. The Go one. AlphaGo, sorry.
Yeah, AlphaGo.
And there was like, I think it was a quote, and it was something along the lines of like, it was teaching us about humanity. Like
Mm.
AI was actually teaching us about
Ourselves.
about ourselves. It was like a mirror in a way. It was like showing us like what it was showing us everything that's simultaneously beautiful about human nature and like the way we try to problem solve, but also it would show us the possibilities and our narrow-mindedness.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful, like that documentary. If anyone who hasn't seen that documentary, that is probably one of my favorite documentaries. Like
Dude, that was an emotional documentary.
I was like, fuck, I was gonna cry.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I have that, like, there's this move. It's called, I think it's like, there's two moves basically. There's like the AI best move that it does in like game 4, where Lee Sedol, who was the human competitor, best Go player of all time probably, he was saying, oh, this machine for sure has to think. Like, you know, it's for sure human, because no way a machine could figure that out, right? That was his interpretation of it. But then you have the comeback, where Lee Sedol, I think it was maybe game 4, Lee Sedol comes with like this amazing move that the best AI in the world could not have predicted, right? So you have, the storyline is just immense there. It's just nice.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm like you, Nathan. I think that seeing in the future AI versus T1, for example, would simultaneously be sad, because there would be a sense of just like, wow, we're just so inferior. But at the same time, it like opens possibilities to be like, imagine how much that would change the game. Like maybe they don't have one jungler. Like maybe they do 2 jungler. Like maybe there's another way.
It'd be something like that. Yeah.
It'd be completely different. Or maybe they put like support mid or something, and they overload mid. Or like there'd be something that we wouldn't think about because we're so rigid, right? We're so tied to this structure of like a top laner, a mid laner, bot.
Curtis, you're right on the point.
fighting.
Like, yeah. This was also what happened in Dota, is that they would often like swap lanes and put like 4 people in one lane. Like, I'm talking about the AI performance, right? So they would like kind of not adhere to these rigid rules that the human players have created. So you have no reason to end laning phase at 14 minutes. Like, you can just group at 10 minutes, right? But like, there is this kind of tendency that we fall into these rigid patterns, and we just assume that they are constraints that you cannot break, right? You cannot build AP on Vayne, and you cannot, go mid lane 4 people at 10 minutes, right? But there might be situations where that's the right play, in terms of maximizing your win probability.
Yeah. All right. So we went on a bit of a tangent there. So coming back, you were trying to figure out the win probability, and we're talking about connecting to the API, getting mass data. That was step number 1, and there was already a lot of pre-existing research done when it comes to that sort of thing. Where to next?
Okay. So that's right. So the situation we are at basically is we have a way to get, X amount of games from Riot's dataset, and we have now trained this kind of like deep learning model that is able to take a game state and say which team is winning. That's what we have at this point. This is nothing new. We have had this for many years now. But then my question was, okay, how do I use this win probability estimate to then figure out which items I should buy? And this step, I think, is not trivial, right? So what we did together with my advisor, who is now my co-founder in my company, Coachless, is we figured out how to compute these kinds of like statistical averages of the win probability that an item's purchase gives you. So what we are talking about right now is win probability added. And this is a statistical measure of, on average, if you purchase this item, how much does it increase your win probability, right? Like that's what we are looking at. And that metric is, for me, like the ultimate metric of comparing items. But as I have given you guys a brief, that's not the only thing we should be looking at in terms of itemization. Like, data is one thing, but we have other ways of looking at it as well.
Okay, so that's kind of where we're at now. And that's what your thesis was on. Like, that's specifically what your thesis was on.
Yes, specifically how to compare items using win probability as a metric. That's what we were looking at.
Now, just again, getting into the weeds here. I'm assuming the way that it works is that the probability of an itemization and what to purchase would just alter throughout the game, right?
Correct.
And so that it would just update as things happen. Statistically, this would be the correct item, or that would be the right item, and then it's literally getting data as the game is running. Is that right?
So that's like the ideal state, right? Like, that's the perfect way it could work. The problem we run into is that right now we are still working with like statistics. So what that means is that we need a large enough sample in some kind of similar game states, right? Because if you want to say, okay, when you're playing, let's say, Hecarim jungle and it's 10 minutes and we have this kind of game state, what item is the best? Then you need to have examples from the data where that situation has occurred multiple times in order to get a good estimate of the value of the item. And that kind of narrows down the possibilities in terms of variables, because the more specific you get in terms of the game state, the less samples you have in that kind of space, right? So if you're just saying, okay, Diana first item or Diana first item versus a mage in the mid lane, then we have plenty of samples and we can make good estimates. But I can't give you right now, using our models, a good estimate of, okay, let's go Blade of the Ruined King first item on Shen in jungle versus X amount of champion, like that's too specific. We don't have that, right? So that's
because
kind of the state.
Because you're like limited, right? Because
Yes.
no one's running around building Blade of the Ruined King, for example, Rek'Sai first item. So you don't have that data to... The sample size just doesn't exist, right? So in a way, then because you're reliant on the player base. So how do you possibly get a number that's reflective of, again, it's have a probability of the outcome of the game?
Yeah. So this is kind of a common issue in, let's say, economics, data science in general, where you're talking about observational studies, kind of like observational statistics, because you're not doing an experiment. You can't just say, okay, I'm gonna, run 1,000 Blade of the Ruined King Shen games. You can't do that right now. So you just have to look at kind of what is the distribution naturally occurring in games, and you will see that, Shen is building Heartsteel, Shen is building these items. So right now we cannot make estimates out of the distribution. So when I say out of the distribution, I'm talking about off-meta items that are not, normally being built. But when you're talking about these items that are commonly built, for example, let's talk about like AD carries. They're building the same items almost every game. You have your ADC items, you have your Static Shiv, Essence Reaver, these kind of items. So you have then, over 100,000 Ezreal games, for example, played last week. So you can have, plenty of Essence Reaver games there, and the sample sizes are good.
Yeah, I guess when I said that, it doesn't really matter, because those, like Blade, again, let's say Blade of the Ruined King Rek'Sai first item. Yeah. That doesn't, everyone knows that doesn't make sense. That's like an extreme example, right? So I guess, but for example, the decision that I always make for my second item on Rek'Sai is like, do I go Black Cleaver or Spear of Sojourn? And currently my mindset is Black Cleaver if I'm against like, tankier champs where I have 80 champs on my team, but if I have full heavy AP on my team, and I'm against a lot of squishy champs, I go Spear of Sojourn. That's literally my thought process right now in terms of what do I build second. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so I was going to say, now did this thesis then culminate in Coachless?
Yes, that is correct. So the models that we developed during the research period is what we are currently developing at Coachless and turning into a product.
Okay.
And I will say that from the kind of like theoretical standpoint, where you're looking at items like through gold efficiency and like the actual numbers that they give, that is kind of a good way to look at things that could work in theory, kind of coming back to Nathan's point. So if you're talking about, this kind of off-meta item on Rek'Sai, for example, then if you don't have data on it, then you need to use your game understanding and your understanding of the game, right? Like your understanding of the theory of the game. So you look at, what is the base stats on Rek'Sai? You look at the ability scalings, you look at things like these, and that's where you can make these kind of like off-meta builds happen without having data to support them.
I've always been a big believer, and I mean this even in my real life, and where we're heading, I think, as a population or as a society, is that, mass data and AI it's going to be such an important part of our lives in terms of complementing and aiding our decision making, right? In the sense that AI, I mean, in particular areas probably will completely take over particular things that we do. But in other areas, it's going to be our companion. It's going to be someone that basically guides us to make better quality decisions because of the data. And that's where I'm really interested in kind of what you're doing, because it's like, at the end of the day, League is a game of, specifics, but it's also there's a human aspect to League of Legends, because at the end of the day, there's another person in the game that you're versing, and there's a psychological element, and then there is also the real-time adaptation aspect and how you feel, like the sense of what they're doing, and there's also the execution of the itemization. But at the same time, if I can have an edge knowing that this is telling me that if I build this item, this is going to give me statistically, this is going to increase the probability of me winning. Even if I don't fully understand that yet, I might try that and be like, oh, wow, that actually was kind of interesting. Oh, that I actually wouldn't have done that before. Oh, that actually kind of makes sense. It felt good, and then that might lead me down a path of self-discovery where I can open a new avenue in my gameplay. So walk us through, I guess, where I'm heading with this is, I guess, would you agree that AI is viewed in your mind, or how do you view AI? And I guess, what's the vision of Coachless? And even just walk us through what the hell is Coachless? I think more sensible place to start.
Good thing to talk about. So Coachless, for me, in simple terms, it's a tool to help with decision making in League of Legends, but it does not attempt to automate anything that the player does. So what I'm building is basically your own coach, kind of data analyst team. If you think about LEC teams nowadays, they have 5 data scientists on every team. They have their coaches, they have analysts looking at, popping up Korea builds or whatever. And I want to have the solo queue player have the ability to have access to something like that. So you can have, recommendations. Hey, I noticed that, you're struggling on Yasuo and you're building, Infinity Edge first. Maybe you should try Blade of the Ruined King first. And then from someone who's like maybe a more advanced player, we can talk about specific itemization things like, oh, you're doing really well on your climb to Challenger right now, but notice that there's like a specific advantage that you can still gain from optimizing your runes or having like that third item on Shen be Mejai Soul Stealer instead of tank item, blah, blah, blah. That's maybe a little bit off the ballpark, but we are just building like small tools that leverage data science and artificial intelligence to give you kind of the best data possible on certain decision making. And I think it's largely I'm just trying to build a product that I really would like to have when I'm climbing, right? And I have a wonderful team of 3 people, or 2 people plus me working on this, and it's something I'm really passionate about. So yeah.
So I guess then my question, I actually saw on X recently, I think about Akali itemization.
I love it that you bring that up. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so walk us through. I'm assuming there is some data that you got around Akali itemization. Do you want to walk us through that?
Yeah, so this is actually a perfect example of like game theory or like fundamental League of Legends and then data. Okay, so what happened is that I saw Certi, the GOAT of NA right now, top lane solo queue player, also academy player. He was playing this kind of like tank bruiser Akali build.
It's like the Iceborne Gauntlet and Riftmaker type thing,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And I told him that personally, I think the Dead Man's Blade would be superior in this build, okay? And then the kind of argument that naturally comes up is that, wait, but Dead Man's Blade, isn't that an item that like Darius is building? Or like, like a tank, like, for example, Shen or like something like, why does Dead Man's Blade make sense here? And the reason why we come to that conclusion, or I come to that conclusion, is that I looked at every single item in the game and I check on average how much it's increasing the win probability of the player that purchases it. And I noticed that Dead Man's Blade was like slightly overperforming. There's more like notorious examples, like for example, Unending Despair is like ridiculously broken right now, but Dead Man's Blade was pretty good. And then I went through different champions, but specifically talking about Akali, and I checked their base stats, okay? Because Dead Man's Blade scales from your base AD, right? Similar to Sheen. And you notice that, okay, Akali has a pretty like high base AD actually. I think it's something like 63 and then scaling like it's in the upper quartile anyways. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I think there's some merit to trying out Dead Man's Blade instead of Iceborne Gauntlet. Plus you have this idea of like Akali's ideal trade pattern or gameplay pattern, which is you queue, you walk out, you want to walk back in, do one auto attack, you Q, walk out, this kind of like in and out play style. A Dead Man's Plate actually synergizes with that a lot. And what people kind of like from a theoretical perspective forget is that you need to look at patch notes. You need to understand what each item does in the game. And like I will tell you, like maybe 80% of the people don't know that first of all, Dead Man's Plate procs even if you don't have 100 stacks, right? So it procs on partial stacks. It's actually giving you like plus 40 physical damage on every auto. Like basically, like no, if you're constantly auto attacking, you're still getting 40 damage on every single auto attack because you naturally walk in between the auto attacks and the stacks don't actually come from like distance traveled, but they just come from time traveled. So the moment you hit an auto attack and input a movement command, you're already stacking up Dead Man's Plate, and then your next auto is gonna hit again. And this item has movement speed on it, which is the most broken stat in the game. So now I'm just thinking, okay, this has to be good, right? But I haven't played Akali a single time. And I just make the tweet. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty confident on this. And then Cat evolved, took the build, I got Challenger with it, got 90% win rate on it. And then people are like, wait, he was right about Dead Man's Plate Akali.
Yeah, right. So that was something that you kind of followed the data. You didn't really understand the why, kind of. I mean, you had a hunch, but you just kind of followed the data, and then it kind of took you to that place. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but I would say there was a lot of kind of like gameplay understanding as well. Even though I don't play Akali myself, it was like I don't just randomly recommend Dead Man's Plate on every champion, right? There was the like going into the base AD, going into like the gameplay pattern of Akali, and seeing if that item synergizes with that, right?
And this was also kind of similar to what I heard about you talk about Mejai. So do you maybe want to elaborate on Mejai's? Because I think that was kind of a big thing recently.
Yeah, so Mejai's is like, from a balance standpoint, very difficult item to balance because the item has always a high win rate. And now everyone's going to say, yeah, we know this already, you talked about this so many times. If you look at Mejai's win rate, it's like 70%, right? And then the logical conclusion that the player comes to is first, oh, is Mejai's broken? Ah, no, it's just being bought when you're already ahead. And I wanted to challenge that status quo, right? That thinking, okay, is it really? Because there are good players that think Mejai's is also good in losing games. So then we looked at like win probability added data in different brackets of games. So we looked at games where the Mejai Soul Stealer purchaser is behind, like in terms of their team. So the team is behind, let's say you have like 0 to 30% win probability. So 2/3 of the time you're losing the game. And we see what the effect of buying Mejai's in those games is. And what we noticed was that actually Mejai Soul Stealer is increasing your win probability more when you're behind than rather when you're ahead. And what is happening is that the item is being bought in the wrong situations and it's still being good, right? So you're winning games, you're buying it, and you win. And when you're losing, you can still buy it and you can still win. And
out of curiosity,
go ahead.
Did that change based on champion? So I'm thinking about like Evelyn, like getting Mejai 0 stacks.
Yeah.
Okay, Evelyn could probably stack that up even with 0 stacks pretty easily, even from behind, because she's really good at killing people even with ults. But let's say, for example, my Syndra bought Mejai's in a game because she was like 2-0 or whatever right there, and then Syndra starts getting behind, but then literally cannot one shot and super squishy and just always dying. Wouldn't those be two, like the champion affects that a lot, because Syndra behind is like probably going to be way more useful to Mejai's than Eve?
I personally did not look at the stats, but I just opened them up. I have here, like, we are looking at Syndra games where you're behind and you purchase Mejai's, and on average it increases your win probability by roughly 7%. And then if you look at Evelyn,
is it 7% relative to if you bought another item? Like I'm struggling to understand what that statistic means.
Okay, so
it means
what I'm talking about is 7 percentage units, right? Percentage points. So let's say you have 10% win probability. This 7% is just additively on top of that.
Okay, so let's say that Syndra is just got a 20. There's a 20% win probability, right?
Yeah.
And they bought Mejai's and it goes to 27%, right? Is what you're saying.
Yes, that's on average. On average. Right?
On average. Okay, well, what does buying Zhonya's do out of interest?
Well, in this example, I'm literally just looking at the data right now. Zhonya's is like around 0.5% plus.
Interesting.
So it's like 7% is very high. It's very
That's
high,
insane.
right?
Yeah.
And
so
actually,
is it the highest? Is that the actual high? The number one?
Mejai's was the best item, like for Syndra behind, like from what I just looked at.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I just chose the worst example.
Yeah, and actually, I just looked
example.
at I just looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was actually a bad user of Mejai's when behind, and for my game theory, what I understand is that Evelyn is an assassin that needs to one-shot the opponent in order to get a kill, right? So you don't have the luxury of picking an item that's right now not powerful. Maybe Syndra,
I guess when I say about Evelyn, it's more about it's easy to not die. It's easier to not die as Evelyn than it is Syndra. That's sort of what I mean.
Well, I would actually say
depends.
It depends, but I would actually say Mejai's, right? But a lot of people misunderstand that. You got to remember, you don't need to get kills to get stacks. You need to get, assists, right? So a lot of mages, like Orianna and stuff, with Mejai. That's why I've always been a massive fan of Darksteel, specifically on champions like Orianna, because you're going to get assists, guaranteed. Like, you're going to E people, you're going to shield people. It's very easy to get assists. So I think, like, what you're probably seeing there is there's probably some combination of two things. These non-committal kind of mages are... they have a much easier time stacking the Mejai's. They're less committal as well, so they don't really need to get into the action. So you can probably stem the bleeding. But also, if you were to get a turnaround kill and a bounty, and you have Mejai's, it's probably compounding that lead that you get in a way. And if you kind of think about it, right? Think of it as I'm just trying to think of it practically. Let's say I've got Ludens and a Shadow Flame. I'm 2 items on a Syndra, but our team is really far behind, and my team's behind, and we're objectively behind. And I'm thinking, okay, I've got if I already have what is it? Mejai's like 1150. If you have is it 1150?
If you have Dark Seal.
If you have Dark Seal,
1250.
1250. Okay, so let's say I could either buy a rod.
Actually, I think it's cheaper now. Maybe.
Yeah, kind of.
I swear they change all the time. I'm pretty sure it's 1250. I think nowadays.
Let me whatever, right? Okay, so
it's 1150. 1150.
Oh, that's right. Okay, 1150, right?
Yeah.
So then I'm thinking to myself, okay, I could basically buy a rod, right? Or I could buy Mejai's.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the thing.
Decision.
So statistically, probability wise, I'm got a higher likelihood of winning the game if I would have built Mejai's rather than a rod in that scenario. Is that correct?
I think 100%. And think about it from a kind of like risk-taking perspective. So if you're already behind in the game, what you want to do is you want to affect the status quo. If you use your gold 1-to-1 and you purchase needlessly large rod, what you're doing there is you're just saying, okay, this is the fair amount of value that I can get for 1,200 gold. And it's probably gonna, keep the game at a pretty even state, right? But when you're purchasing Mejai's, you're saying, okay, now there's a risk that this item doesn't pay off. But if we get one shutdown, if we get a good kill, then I have 10 Mejai stacks. I suddenly start getting movement speed. We can get more peaks. We can probably stack that up. And then we have this kind of like volatility that comes into play. And that's kind of what you want to do when you're behind, because you want to challenge the status quo. You want to get more risks, right? When you're ahead, you want to kind of like keep the situation as is.
That's why when you're ahead, I mean, I'd love to see the stats on this, but when you're ahead, my intuition has always said, when you're ahead, you want to build more defensive, and when you're behind, you want to build more damage. Is that correct?
So I just checked. Banshee is the best AP item when you're ahead.
Yeah, dude, that makes so. I feel that. I've got like so many vivid memories where like the enemy's fed and they buy like a Zhonya's and a Banshees, and it's just like unwinnable. There's no counterplay. You can't come back because they don't need additional damage because they're already so far ahead.
And guess the best ADC item when ahead from our data.
It can't be GA, right? That's impossible.
GA, it's GA.
No way.
Yes,
that makes sense.
Negative damage, I swear, as an ADC with GA. if I said an enemy, because AD carries are pretty. I mean, obviously it depends on the rank, but I mean, okay, this is obviously the stats don't lie here, XPetu, so I trust the stats, right? But I'm just talking about from experience in my games. I've won so many games against Fed AD carries who buy GA, they lose their GA because they play like psychopaths, and then they don't have the damage, and then we come back and then we.
That's so lie, Nathan.
Huh? Yes, that's
Don't
clearly don't
lie.
lie. But I'm just special in my games. There we go. I'm the outlier.
But this is an interesting topic. So this is like regarding feel versus data, right? Because I think a lot of people, myself included, they buy items based on feeling, right? Because you buy an item such as let's say like a collector, static shiv. It feels very rewarding the moment you buy it, right? You feel very powerful when you have that item. Then you buy an item such as let's talk about like support items like Locket or what's the support item that gives you movement speed? Like the what is it called? Sorry.
I'm terrible with support itemization, honestly.
The trailblazer, right?
Oh, Trailblazer, yeah.
Yeah. That item does not feel that powerful to the user, but you're not seeing the effects because it's like a hidden effect, right? Because your teammates are getting a lot of movement speed. The same goes for aura items such as Abyssal Mask. You don't feel powerful yourself if you buy it as a tank, but you notice that your Syndra just one-shot the ADC, maybe. So these are items where your feeling and like the statistics are maybe kind of in an imbalance, right? So I think like in a general way, what I have learned is that oftentimes items that feel good are probably a little bit overvalued, and items that feel not rewarding are probably undervalued. That's my general consensus.
Wait, so can you say that one sentence again? Items that feel good or what?
Items that feel good tend to be overvalued, so they tend to be bought more than they should be.
Interesting.
And items that buff your team and have hidden effects that you don't see, right? Stuff like movement speed, stuff like aura effects, those are usually like undervalued, therefore they should be bought more, right? Because they're better than you think they are.
What are some examples of overvalued items that you have found that the community overvalues?
Well, let me see here. Hull Breaker, for example.
Hullbreaker, okay.
Yeah, a Hullbreaker is like, by definition, the bonk feels good, right? You hit the tower, you get big dopamine
You can
spike.
see the dopamine, yeah.
Okay, out of interest, because I think this is where champ specifics matter. Because I always was a big Hullbreaker goblin on Urgot specifically. And I know some Urgots hate that item, but it felt so good. Out of interest, if you go to the stats on Urgot, what's the stats like with Hullbreaker on Urgot? Comparatively to, let's say, another champ that would build Hullbreaker, like a split pusher, you would say, like...
Well, I will... There you're on the right track. So actually, first item, Hullbreaker, is right now with 1,500 sample size the best item for Urgot.
All right.
So it's like, champions do make a big difference, right?
Yeah.
A Hullbreaker on Urgot is not the same item as a Hullbreaker on Jax, for example.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. No, that's actually really, I found that the feeling really interesting. Because I'm actually a massive field player when it comes to everything. Like when it comes to runes, when it comes to itemization, even when it comes to champions that are strong. I actually have a mantra or something that I follow throughout my entire league career, and it's basically served me really well. And it goes like this. It says, if anything feels hard to deal with and annoying to play against, it's typically good. So like you know how you see sometimes like some weird OTP builds, like they play this weird champ, and like these OTPs, they'll play the champ regardless, right? Whether let's say there's an Alawi OTP and they're playing that champ when it's shit, they're playing it when it's good. If that champion feels really hard to deal with, then typically it's a sign that, okay, maybe that champ is strong in this particular meta, or that item is particularly strong in this particular meta. I've used my feelings in game as a heuristic or as some sort of kind of like baseline starting point. And I use the example of Slogdog, the Yorick player. Some games when Slogdog plays in a specific meta, it feels incredibly hard to deal with. And then other times Slogdog plays and it feels like he's the shittest champ in the game. So like I feel like Yorick is one of the champions. But yeah, I've used kind of feelings maybe to a fault. Maybe I've overvalued it, but it's just kind of been my kind of toolkit.
I think feeling is a completely valid, and I think it's something that you need, right? Because like no matter how like statistical you get, at the end of the day you still have to play the actual game, and probably like more so than even like get wins, the objective is to have fun. So if you're going Locket of the Iron Solari, Trailblazer, Abyssal Mask every game, you might not have as much fun as you would building like high damage. So it depends on the person, right?
Now, so I want to go to here this document you sent me XPetu, where you've called it the 3 lenses of itemization. Do you want to kind of walk us through your philosophy when it comes to this?
Yeah, 100%. So I was just thinking, like, what are the kind of 3 factors that go into itemization? So for me, I came up with 3 main points, right? Number 1 is feeling, okay? This experimentation through play, how the item actually feels in practice. Number 2 is theory, which I refer to here as kind of like, base stats, ability scalings, what the item gives, what's the effect, what's the numbers.
That's kind of like what you did with the Dead Man's Akali,
exactly.
right?
It's kind of logical reasoning based on the game rules, okay? And then you have the third one, which is data, so analytics, statistics, that kind of thing. And I think these 3 together comprise like a majority of the kind of decision making or thinking you have to do when you think about itemization.
So what do you feel as though the community at large maybe undervalues? Do you think it's the feeling, theory, or data aspect of this?
So I think what undervalues? I think definitely feeling is overvalued. That's my number 1 point. I would say like theory and data are both probably undervalued. But the problem with data is that until now, and this is completely shilling for Coachless, by the way, I'm 100% convinced that win rate data, so what you find on, I'm not going to name the websites, but the statistics websites.
The various websites.
Yes, the various websites. And you look at, every champion and you see every item there and you have your win rates. Those numbers are completely meaningless, right? Because you have Mejai there with 70% win rate. Even though it's a good item, that's not the reason why it's a good item. You have Trinity Force, X win rate, those win rates, they tell you nothing about the item strength. The pick rates can give you an idea of what's being bought currently in the meta, but it does not give you an unbiased estimate of the item strength. Therefore, I think the data is like not being undervalued. It's rather like the current state of data on the market is pretty bad, and that's what I want to change with Coachless.
I want to get into this because again, I know me and Nathan know nothing about this. Let's say we want to use one of these various websites.
Yeah.
And we look at one of these various websites. We'll go to a champion. We're going to go to Rek'Sai, and then Rek'Sai has starting item. There'd be starting item. Oh, that doesn't really count in jungle, but let's say first item.
Yeah.
Okay, first item. And let's say you're going to have, some of them are going to tell you win rates, they're going to tell you win rate, and they're going to tell you the sample size of people that build that particular first item. So you might have like 5,000 Rek'Sais that build this item, and this is the win rate. And then you have 5,000 Rek'Sais that build this item, that's the win rate. So can you explain to me in layman's terms how that is biased and maybe what the average person can look out for when navigating these websites and analytics?
100%. So the first bias is selection bias. So that's what we have to understand firstly. So items don't just randomly appear in your inventory, right? Because you have to actually choose which item you buy. And I'll make the example here with Rek'Sai. Maybe I should share screen here because it's easier to see.
Sure.
Yep.
So now on the left here, we have, Rek'Sai itemization, Emerald plus jungle, Analytics. And then we have same patch on Coachless. And here, like first column is first item. And we're going to go to first item here on the Analytics as well. And if we look at the items, we see, okay, Stridebreaker is being purchased the most often. It's the same here. So we're sorting by sample size now. And then the next one, in this case...
Be Titanic Hydra, right?
Yeah, Eclipse and Titanic Hydra. Looks like we have a little bit fewer games. So they're like roughly even, right? But those are the next ones. And then you have Yumu's Ghostblade. And now, if you would look at strictly win rate, you notice that, Yumu's Ghostblade has 56% win rate. So is this the best item? Now the good player will tell you that, oh no, it's just that some Rek'Sai OTP was like Omega fed in low elo and decided to buy Yumu's Ghostblade to stomp the enemy, right? There's 1,000 such cases.
Because it's so small sample size, yeah. And as we see there, so you have 1,000 games of Yomu's and there's 22,000 of Stridebreaker. I play Stridebreaker every single game.
But I will say the sample size is large enough. Like 1,000 gives you a very good statistical estimate.
Okay, interesting.
But the problem is that it's 56% win rate, and this is coming from the fact that the item is being purchased so often when you're already ahead. And to back that up, look at the middle number here that I'm highlighting. That 53% is the average win probability at the time that you're purchasing the item. So what that's saying is that Stridebreaker is being bought in 50%, right? It's perfectly equal. So Stridebreaker is like not biased in any direction because it's just flat out being purchased in the situation where you're even on average. But on average, Yumu's Ghostblade, you already have a 3.5% lead for your team, okay? And then we look at the top number, which is the win probability added, and we notice that the Yumu's purchaser actually loses win probability after purchasing it. But if you look at like where the number ends up, is that if you do 50 minus 0.11, there's, by the way, we are applying some debiasing techniques here, which probably doesn't happen on Analytics, so that's why the numbers don't exactly match. But what happens here is that the resulting number is like 49.9, okay? And that's like roughly then your end win probability. And then here it's going to be like 52%, but you lost win probability by purchasing this item. And this you don't see in win rate data at all. And if you look at what's the best item in Coachless kind of opinion, is that Titanic Hydra is like overperforming everything by a wide margin because it's increasing the win probability by 2%, right?
Yeah, and that's what these stats don't show. These websites don't show the win probability added ICs. That's the unique thing.
Because no one else is doing this right now, okay?
Can we do this exercise with another champion? Yes. I'm just curious. Curtis, what's a mid-champion?
What do you want?
Let me think of a champ that
what's a champ that has a one item specifically?
Okay, let's go Aurora out of interest.
Okay, yeah, Aurora top lane.
But Aurora's bad because it's top, right? Or can you just
mid
top?
Aurora mid lane, okay.
Aurora mid.
Yeah.
First item, or what?
Yeah, let's look at first item. Because a lot of people build Malignance, but I think Ludens is better, personally.
And here, let's do sample size again, so it's comparative. So Malignance is the most bought, right? And you see that win rate is, roughly 50%. Here, actually, you see that Malignance usually decreases your win probability when you buy it. The next most popular item is Ludens, which here seems very good, 1.5% increase in win probability. And you see that matches kind of with the win rate here. But you don't know that for sure. It's also being bought in a little bit of an advantageous situation already. So some of the difference of the win rate is coming from the actual purchase situation, which is not relevant to the item. And then there is kind of the effect of the item on top of that. And that's kind of like what we are taking out of the numbers.
Okay, can we go... Yeah. Oh, sorry, go on.
I will say that this one is kind of low sample size. You have only like, 400 games we have Storm Surge. So I wouldn't take that necessarily. But it's like a good example that there might be some tech here. Like it's a possibility that that's good, but we don't know.
What about second item? Can you break down second items?
Yeah, so we can also make the assumption that let's say we went Ludens. So you can do the same on Analytics actually. You can click and then you can filter the rest of the items by Ludens. And now everything is filtered so that we have Ludens first item. And by sorting sample size, again, we see that Shadow Flame is the most bought second item after Ludens, which is pretty good. It has 1.0 increase in win probability. You have kind of low sample size examples of Rabadons and Mejais, but notice, by the way, that these are being bought in a very advantageous position. You have 62% win probability already at the time of purchasing this item, and that is also seen in kind of here, like you have, okay, Mejais is 80% win rate. Is it the best item? We don't know. Rabadon 60%, because that's coming from the purchase situation and not the actual effect. But then you have items like Storm Surge and Shadow Flame that seem to be like very good. And they're kind of similar here. But again, you cannot discern that from the win rates themselves, right?
Yeah, so on Coachless here, it says that Storm Surge and Shadow Flame are like basically identical, right?
Yeah, they're very close. They're both in similar situations and they have a similar effect.
Whereas on that's a big difference on here.
Yes.
On here exactly. It shows like a 3%. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Out of interest, if you click Malignant's first item, can you show me how it changes?
Yeah, let me do that here. Malignant's first item, and then actually you see that the same two items are still good.
Yeah. Okay.
And then on Analytics, the most popular second item after Malignance is Liandry's, which...
Yeah, I actually wanted to see what Cosmic Drive and they said about Cosmic Drive and Liandry's. That's like,
and they seem very bad. Cosmic Drive seems to be very bad. But notice it's also, 52% purchase win probability already. But here you see, Cosmic Drive 54% win rate. That's pretty good, right? It has much higher win rate than the Shadow Flame and Storm Surges. But when we look at the deeper data, we notice that, these are actually, being bought in fairer positions and they increase the win probability.
So based off this data, right, what would you build second item? You'd be more inclined to build Shadow Flame or Storm Surge?
I would build Shadow Flame or Storm Surge, just depending on what gold amount you recall with, right? That's a factor you have to consider.
Yeah.
I don't remember the build path for these because I don't play mages. But I know this is like the Hextech Alternator and the Rod, right?
Yeah,
so
the
sometimes
Rod,
getting Rod might be difficult.
Yeah, right.
Oh, actually, that brings me to a question here, XPetu. How much does components change win rates and probability? Like, I've always been like, is Warhammer or Phage better when I've got a Black Leaf? I've never had an answer for that, by the way. It's like, whatever sort of feels better, or the ability haste. Do components matter that much, or not really?
They matter a lot. I'm excited to say we are building a feature for components as well. And that's I feel like that's gonna be the game changer, right? Because then what we're like planning is we're able to do an analysis of what component prioritization you should do. So when you're purchasing towards an item, what's like the component you should prioritize first? And then you have champions like tanks, for example, that want to do like a Bummy Cinder before their first legendary item. And it's very hard to say if that Bummy Cinder is then like good decision or no. And then you have champions like maybe like Kiana wants to do like a Dirk before Profane Hydra, right? Something like this. So those component purchases, I think they're very impactful. But like you said, right now we don't have the answer to that. But you'll have to stay tuned for that. I don't have data for you right now.
I think that's really important as well, because I think there's a lot of creative things you can do with components, actually. Even with mages, like sometimes you can just sit on a Lost Chapter and then build another item. Or,
100%. Lost Chapter seems like on paper very absurd, and you see popular streamers like Baus doing this as well, that they purchase Lost Chapter very early, then build Cosmic Drive on Kragas, right? These are classics.
Yeah, really, really cool. Really interesting.
We sort of talked a little bit about the challenges earlier in this episode that you sort of faced with the data sets and all that sort of stuff. Riot, in their announcement video, they made a like a joke. Sorry, the 2025 changes video. They made a joke. It's like, we're going to rework the item system again. Does the constant changes of items affect your work and things? Is that something you like annoyed by, or like you like that, or like, so because that's like a unique thing. Like you think about games like AlphaGo and stuff like that. It's like a bit when I have a chess. It's like they don't have like suddenly the whole the pawn doesn't suddenly change movements and stuff like that, right? So what's your thoughts on this, out of curiosity?
Okay, so there's two topics there. So the first topic is patches, and we assume that the game structure seems the same, but the balance changes. So when you have nerfs and buffs to an item, what happens is that the balance shifts a little bit. And I think that is very good for the game, and it's also very interesting from a data analytics standpoint, because that gives you like a even field with the older competitors, right? Because let's say League was not changed for 10 years. Then every big statistics company would have, hundreds of millions of games, maybe billions of games, and they would just have so much more data that I would be just out of depth, right? As a new company. No way to do that. But because the game changes every 2 weeks, it's like a reset of the playing ground every 2 weeks. So actually, I love that. I think it's very good. I think it keeps the game fresh. But the second point is Riot's like API data itself and the items. If you think like, the game has a lot of bugs, wait till you see the API. By the way, Riot, I love the API. Please don't remove it. It's fantastic. But you could ask my main kind of developer, like our co-founder. He has written 20,000 lines of code for dealing with Viego's bugs, basically. Because every time Viego takes a champion, what happens is that his entire inventory gets destroyed by the kind of like timeline, and then he purchases all of the items that the opponent has. And then you can imagine there are like so many bugs where you have Viego taking someone, then he dies or he doesn't die. A Rod of Ages in his inventory upgrades during the time where Viego is possessing someone else, causing it to make us think that the Rod of Ages is in Viego's inventory. All these kind of cases. There are like so many edge cases that result from the complexity. Like I'm saying, it's just like inevitable in cases like this. Like I can't imagine how hard it must be to, you know, maintain so many different game logics. But there's been a lot of like case by case things that we had to code, you know, to make everything work.
So what are your kind of, I guess, you know, right now, you know, working on Coachless, what are some things that you were mentioning before, the components? Are there any other factors, things that you're looking forward to adding to Coachless in the future?
So the thing that we are adding actually this week is enemy team damage composition. So what I really think as a tank player is very important to look at, obviously, who is the main damage dealer on the enemy team. So we are adding these kind of filters where you can say, okay, let's say the enemy is magic damage favored. They have over 70% magic damage or 60% magic damage. Then how does that change like the recommendations of the items? And these kinds of things, then you can start looking at for ADCs, for example, if the enemies are high range versus low range, enemies have high burst, low burst, how does that change my itemization? How much does immortal shield bows win probability increase when you're buying it versus bursty champions versus you know, sustained damage champions. These kinds of like game situation elements that for me as a player would make sense affect the data, then seeing that actually in the numbers as well, that's kind of like one of the things that we are working on right now.
Interesting. Nathan, did you have any other kind of questions about statistics?
Yeah, another one here is there anything that sort of surprised you when it comes to data and, you know, your journey over the 7 months and sort of building this and about like this does not just be that, just about in league in general. Like, have you learned more about the game in general? Like, you feel like you've become a better player? Like, has it changed your perspective on maybe Riot's job around balance and itemization?
I think it's a fair question. I will say, like, as a disclaimer, that I actually played my first league game in 100 days yesterday because I was on a trip for 3 months, right?
Is that a record for you, XPetu?
That's a record. I think 100 days is now the longest that I've been without league for the past 12 years. So it's a long break for me. I felt kind of rusty, but then this is also I went to play some ARAMs, and then I looked at some item balances, and then I played Bard DPS in ARAM. Ended up going pretty well. But to answer your question, I think it does shift my perspective, but also doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, I've been a long time believer that there's lots of like hidden items that might be powerful. So it's kind of giving me some validation that this was actually the case. But it's really cool to see like something that you build together with a small team then actually have that like concrete number there. And it can give you like, hey, you know, this is the hidden OP Vayne build, blah, blah, blah. And then you actually try it and you're like, wait, it works. So I think that's just really interesting.
Awesome. All right, well, unless you had anything else you wanted to talk about here, XPetu, or we can wrap up the shout-outs at the end here.
Oh, I have one topic, okay? I watched Curtis's video with LS. I think it was a wonderful discussion. I love both of your content. I will say that LS has seen Coachless, and then he talked about stuff, and he was very positive. He said, like, okay, I think this is going in the right direction, right? But he keeps bringing up this one argument, which is something called introduction of knowledge, in his words. And what he talks about is basically, if you give someone a recommendation, for example, now me recommending Mejai to the wide public, right? I'm saying Mejai is a good item, you should buy it. His take is that then that makes Mejai a worse item, basically, because then people will play it and they won't be as good and they will, you know, whatever, lose games, blah, blah, blah. And he's kind of sometimes using that as a counter argument against statistics in general, because his thought process, I think what he has verbalized is kind of like, okay, if you show a statistic, then it changes the underlying like balance state somehow, or the underlying distribution. Therefore, you should not just rely on data purely. But I mean, I'm just talking to myself here, but I think the kind of like counter argument is that the statistics gives you a lens into the kind of like underlying game balance, and no matter what the players actually do, you still have kind of like that one way of looking at the game and saying, no, I think Mejai is like generally undervalued as a item that you buy from behind. Yeah, I don't know if anyone caught that, but like that's just something I wanted to verbalize because I was tired of that argument. So
yeah. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, but just interpreting what you said, it's kind of as if like, okay, Mejai has this. Let's just use that arbitrary number you said before. I buy it in this game. It's going to increase my win probability by, on average, by 7%.
Yeah.
His argument is that if many people are then buying Mejai's, that's going to warp the data in a way whereby it's going to change the perceived effectiveness of the item or something.
Is that because the people that are building this item and they're winning, they're better players, so they actually can capitalize on that. But if people blindly pick these items, then it ruins the entire data set. Is that what he's saying?
That's the underlying assumption. I think there is some merit to that. Like I 100% think that there is that kind of effect as well. Because like when you look at items that are being purchased in the right situations and are super good, then there's probably like a bias that those are actually good players as well. We're kind of like removing that as well out of the equation, but there is slight bias there. And then when you make a recommendation, let's say a YouTube video that gets 1 million views saying, oh, you should always purchase Mejai's second item, then for sure that's going to have an effect on the Mejai's win probability and the win rate, right? But I think the effect is not as large as some analysts like LS make it out to be. And still, for the good players, and for the people that were originally buying it, it does not change the underlying balance state of the game, right? So the item is still good, even though the data is kind of being skewed. But yeah,
it would also depend on the sample size as well, right?
Yeah, of course.
Right. If the sample size was large, it wouldn't matter. I mean, that means you'd already baked in the data. Like the data then would then suggest that regardless, too many people buying it, it'd be fine. But yeah, my 2 cents on that, just really quickly thinking that through. The way I view it is that it's like it's not black or white. You know what I mean? Like it'd be like, okay, well, sure, maybe there is some bias, but at the same time, it's worth investigating anyway.
Yes.
I
love that. By the way, like I think I've had so many cases where like I come to someone with data and I'm like, hey, look at this. Mejai's is good when behind. And then there's like another counter argument, which is, oh, but that's only because good players are purchasing it who already have a lot of Dark Seal stacks. Therefore, it's good. Like the mental gymnastics that they can do in order to say that, oh, it's not actually true, right? But there's always like an underlying sense of truth. I think there is some bias there still, but you can never remove like all of the error and all of the bias from data. That's just the fact. Like unless you have infinite sample size and completely randomized control trials, there's always going to be some error. But I still think it's like a valuable tool to have in your toolkit as a League of Legends player to be able to say, like, let's see what the data says, and then look at the theory, and then we test it in game, we play 20 games, and then we have a very like holistic understanding of the item, right? Because you looked at the data, you looked at the theory, and then you tried it out.
Yeah, I mean, and the reality, I mean, as content creators, right? Like, if people are saying, going around saying, buy this item blindly, of course it's not going to end well. But like, ideally content creators say, this item is good in this scenario, or there's like some sort of a tip. It's like, if you like playing the champion like this, then buy the, you know what I mean? Like, sure. Like, I think that I see both sides, but I just think that as content creators, we do have to be careful. In the sense that, like, people, especially you, XPetu, because you're like, everyone loves you. You're so well respected in the league community.
Thanks.
You know what I mean? And you've done so much for the league community. People, if you say,
you could say that, or XPetu's a danger to the community.
I'm a danger.
Feels like he's a danger to the community. He's ruining people's solo queue games.
I want to see this kind of like uprising of like this kind of like movement against league statistics. Like, if it gets well, they're like, remove statistics. We want to go back to the good old days where we were operating in the dark, like Middle Ages.
But I see your perspective all the time, because you're just trying to get people to like, I can just, your vibe and your story and everything, you're always trying to break the status quo. That's what it kind of sounds like to me. It's like you're looking for a unique, creative way to do something more effectively and optimally, rather than just following this rigid kind of predetermined kind of way.
100%.
And that's kind of like, we even touched on this in our last episode, where like you wanted to find a unique way to win on Shen, a better way to win on Shen, rather than or a different way to interpret the champion holistically, rather than what everyone else is saying. So I respect that. And I think we need the community needs people like you because like me and Nathan are the boring. Here we go again.
No. Hey, I appreciate that.
Process. Here we go.
Yeah. Not to turn into a glaze fest, but you guys are doing good job. I love your podcast. It's really nice. But I will say, like, on the status quo breaking, I think it's just fun. Like I've gotten so many good dopamine hits from solo killing an opponent with like AP Shen and stuff like ridiculous stuff, right? So like that's like I'm addicted to like that kind of off meta thinking, both in the game and outside of it.
Beautiful. I think that's a great way to wrap up the episode. We'll put the link to Coachless in the we can chuck
description. If people want to check that out.
If people want to check out XPetu's Coachless.
And I guess, Curtis, you and I have to start preparing for the day. I mean, it's called Coachless, right? They're going to be out of a job. You don't need coach anymore.
No.
AI.
No.
AI coaches.
No. AI and coach can, they can coexist. It's fine.
Did you see? There's like have you guys heard about the Tyler One?
Yes.
Voice package. Have you heard about that, Curtis?
Yes.
You get a voice announcer. It's like an AI thing in the game.
Backseat AI.
Backseat. Yeah, and he tells you what your mistakes you're making, and he like abuses you in the game and stuff like that.
Well,
So that's,
I don't want to open that can of worms, but very simply, something I've always thought about. Is that what people want? Do people want someone telling them what to do in the game?
I have an opinion on this.
What's your 2 cents?
I think League of Legends as a game for me is like sacred. I don't want any overlays. I don't want any voice coach in my ear. Like I want to mute all chat. I want to be silent. I want to focus on the game, and I want to play the game. Right? Like I think that's the best way to enjoy League for me. Obviously, if you're playing 5-man pre-made, it's more fun to talk, blah blah blah, whatever. But I don't mess with the game. I don't want to mess with the game, right? I don't think people want someone in your ear yelling you like, okay, hey, you should do this next. And they don't want an AI telling you, oh, statistically, Trinity Force is the best next item for you to purchase. So purchase it now, or recall now, or do a roam now. Like, I don't want to do that. But I think you have merit to kind of giving tools outside of the game that can help you then develop your intuition and the actual gameplay.
I mean, I'm with you there, XPetu. The game's sacred. I struggle myself with, there's the whole conversation about the jungle timers, right? The overlay of the jungle timers, and like, I'm a purist, right? Like, and I literally have times where, like, I'm, as sort of a, a challenger player, you pretty much know the spawn times of the camps. But there's sometimes where you get a little bit sloppy with your mental stack, and you're like, shit, I forgot about his Krug spawning at that time. That would have helped, right? But there's like, that's like one, for me. But like, I actually recommend my students, my clients to literally use the jungle timers. But yeah, even for me, like, I would literally just cop that disadvantage and say, just be better, Nathan. Have better, don't lose focus and figure out those timers for yourself rather than have that overlay.
Unironically, I don't play jungle because of the existence of jungle timers. Like, because I downloaded these different, minimap jungle timers apps. I tried them. I see the value that they provide. I think they're completely broken.
Absolutely.
Like, it should be in the game. But I don't want to play with any, app on my desktop running at the same time because performance issues, because, bugs, because it's messing with the purity of the game, right?
I hate that stuff as well. I hate that, the one that I personally hate the most. That objectively is good, but I hate it.
I know what you're gonna say.
The summoners one.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, someone blows.
Yeah, you have to click that. You have to click it.
You have to click it.
But still, it's like, you know what I mean? Like,
it's just ruining the purity of the game. Like the way it should just be like a super even playing field. Everyone. It's just like when everyone's going in raw.
Yeah.
Where everyone's raw dogging the game. That's what I.
Someone's gonna tweet like from me 3 years ago having a sponsorship from Professor where I promote this kind of like spell tracker, and now he's gonna quote tweet this, and there's gonna be like, oh look, hypocrisy, blah blah blah. But yeah, I don't think it's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, XPetu, for coming in.
Hey, thank you guys for having me on. This was really fun.
Sure, we'll do many more in the future.
Hopefully.
Again, link in the description. Nathan, any other notes?
As our usual sign off, 3-block process. We'll see you guys in the next episode.
See you guys. Bye.